Hi, I'm Kala, and this is the story of how I went from being called unemployed and ungrateful to quietly becoming the boss my own mother didn't even recognize. When I came home after losing my contract job, all she said was, "You should have been more like your sister." What she didn't know was that the files she printed every week at her new office, the ones she praised, I wrote them, alone, at a gas station, with 57 cents in my account. Before we go any further, tell me, have you ever felt like you were only seen when someone needed to use your work, but never your name? If yes, comment number 1. If no, comment number 0. This is a story about quiet strength you won't want to miss. You'll never be anything if you keep chasing those pipe dreams. That was Mom's welcome after 6 months of silence. The air inside the house hadn't changed. Same faint hint of lavender cleaner clinging to the floorboards. Same overwatered fern leaning toward the kitchen window. But something felt different to me. Maybe it was the banner. "Welcome home, Savannah," still hung across the living room archway, a little crooked now, the tape on one side losing its grip. I dropped my duffel by the coat rack and glanced around. It had only been 2 days since I called, saying I needed a place to crash, just for a week or two, but my room was already repurposed as Savannah's remote office. That same kitchen table once held my first laptop, the one I used to build lessons nobody ever saw. Now, it held a bouquet of congratulatory cards and a framed picture of Savannah holding a marketing award in a satin jumpsuit. Mom called it her breakout moment. I called it Tuesday. Mom barely looked up from arranging forks when I entered the dining room. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I didn't know if you still ate meat, but I made pot roast. Savannah always loved it." I nodded, unsure what to say. The last time I'd seen her, we were both in the same room, but miles apart. My news about losing a contract gig drowned under Savannah's LinkedIn promotion post. Tonight, it seemed the script hadn't changed. Mr. Kaplan from next door shuffled in with a container of what he claimed were famous church pickles. He squinted at me and smiled politely. "Didn't know you still lived here," he said. Mom chuckled, pouring him sweet tea. "Oh, Kala's just here for a little while. She's still figuring things out." I bit the inside of my cheek. I hadn't even sat down, and already I'd become the storyline they shared for flavor. Dinner was pot roast, mashed potatoes, cornbread, and conversation that looped in circles around Savannah. "She baked that green bean casserole for last week's brunch at Ethan's," Mom beamed, handing out plates. "She's always had that hosting instinct, you know?" Mr. Kaplan nodded with greasy approval. I reached for a roll. No one asked me what I'd been up to, or how I was doing, or why I looked like I hadn't slept properly in 3 nights. Underneath the hum of the fridge and the soft tick of the wall clock, I sat and watched the gaps in the conversation. The pauses where I might have fit in. If anyone had noticed, I looked at the family photos above the sideboard. Savannah in high school cap and gown, Savannah at graduation, Savannah at her first job. None of me past age 18. Just one photo of the two of us on the staircase, where I was mostly in shadow. After dinner, I helped clear plates. Mom handed me the casserole dish without a word. I rinsed it in silence, glancing over at the fridge. Taped to the side, beneath a faded grocery list, was an envelope, pale pink, my handwriting unmistakable. I leaned closer, my own name in the return corner. It was the Mother's Day card I'd mailed last year, unopened, tucked behind a receipt for carpet shampoo. I didn't mention it, just stared at it a little too long before drying my hands and walking toward the hall. In the guest room, once my bedroom, I found the closet already half full of Savannah's off-season clothes. I sat on the bed, took a breath, then opened my duffel. I started packing again, not with the urgency of someone running, but the quiet method of someone who knew when she'd overstayed an invitation no one sent. Voices drifted down the hall. Mom was laughing with Mr. Kaplan about how Savannah might be featured in a local business podcast. "Maybe you'd be further along," Mom said, not realizing I could hear, "if you stopped pretending to be special." I stood, not abruptly, just enough to make the chair shift slightly on the hardwood. I walked back down the hall, past the family photos, past the banner, past the unopened envelope that never meant enough to be read. I didn't slam the door. I didn't explain. I just left, again. The room smelled like bleach, old regrets, and microwave popcorn. But for the first time in weeks, no one could call me disappointing. The walls were a tired beige, chipped in the corners, with one stubborn spot of peeling paint near the doorframe. I didn't mind. The bed creaked when I sat on it, and the blanket was scratchy, but it was mine for the night. Outside, Portland drizzle tapped softly on the window, blurring the view of a faded gas station sign across the road. I had $213 left to my name, a backpack with 3 clean shirts, and one fraying notebook full of lesson outlines from a lifetime ago. Grandma used to say, "You don't need to be loud to build something big." I used to smile when she said it, back when I thought it meant I'd someday be quietly successful. Lately, it sounded more like a line from a sympathy card. Still, I repeated it to myself as I opened my old laptop, fingers stiff from cold and hesitation. I pulled up a site I hadn't touched in over a year, a tutoring platform I'd signed up for back when things were stable. My profile still existed, albeit dusty. Patient, reliable, specializes in SAT prep and writing. I added a recent photo, changed my location, and clicked Available. That part felt small, like flicking on a porch light in a storm. But it was something. The next morning, I walked 2 blocks in a damp hoodie to the library. The volunteer behind the desk couldn't have been older than 16. He looked up from a graphic novel and asked if I needed help. "Just looking for a computer with decent Wi-Fi," I said. He smiled and pointed me toward a Chromebook cart. "You get 2 hours a day," he added. "Longer if you help Mr. Lewis figure out Gmail." Mr. Louis sat near the window, adjusting his glasses and squinting at the keyboard. "I just want to write to my grandson," he said softly. I showed him how to open a new message and how to use the paperclip icon for attachments. He grinned like I'd handed him a ticket to the moon. Afterward, I crossed the street to a small cafe called Bean and Birch. The windows were foggy from the inside, but warm yellow light spilled out onto the sidewalk. Hand-painted mugs lined a shelf near the register. I ordered the cheapest drip coffee and left the tip jar heavier than I could afford. "First time here?" the woman behind the counter asked. She had gray streaks in her braid and a name tag that read Mercy. I nodded. She leaned on the counter and studied me for a second. "You've got the look," she said. "What look?" "The one that says, 'I'm starting over, so please don't ask too many questions.'" Her eyes twinkled. I gave a small laugh. "That's about right." She poured me a fresh cup. "Coffee's on me today. You can tip tomorrow." Over the next few days, we built a rhythm. I'd come in each morning with my Chromebook, order the refill special, and take the corner table near the plug. Marcy kept my cup warm and offered muffins that were one day past perfect, but still good. On the 3rd day, she asked if I could help her daughter with math. "She's got test anxiety, and I'm not much good past fractions," she said. "In exchange for unlimited coffee?" I asked. Unlimited coffee and community goodwill, she replied. Trust me, that's better than Yelp. That night, I dug through my old external drive, searching for lesson plans. I found more than I expected. Files labeled Grammar Ladder, Say T for auditory learners, and videos of me explaining essay structure using sandwich metaphors. I'd forgotten how much I'd built. Then I found the scan. It was tucked in a folder marked Legal Stuff, a PDF of Grandma's will. I'd seen it before, but this time I read every word. Toward the end, in her tidy, italic handwriting, all educational work co-developed with Calla shall remain under her sole name. My breath caught. I didn't know if it had ever been filed officially, but it was there. Proof that someone believed in me enough to protect the things I made. That same night, a notification pinged on the tutoring platform. A single mom in Texas was looking for GED support. I read her message twice. She sounded overwhelmed and embarrassed. I wrote back in simple, steady language. We scheduled our first session for Thursday. 2 mornings later, I was skimming through new student applications when one name made me sit up straight. It was listed under New Staff Training, Admin Assistance. I blinked. Diana Jensen. My fingers froze. She was working for me and had no idea. The office files my mom copied each week? I wrote them. At a gas station table, with 57 cents in my account. I remember that table like it was a person. Scratched Formica, sticky edge, a buzzing fluorescent light above me that blinked every 3rd second. Back then, I sat with an old laptop, borrowed Wi-Fi, and a box of saltines, trying to build something that mattered. Now those same files, lesson outlines, assessment rubrics, and writing guides were being uploaded to our central server by my mother. She didn't know, not yet. Our platform has grown over the past year. We'd gone from a 2-person test prep service to a full curriculum company with 6 remote staff and a wait list of tutors-to-be. We leased a small, sunlit office in a downtown co-working building. Exposed brick, endless plants, and coffee from a machine that always smelled a little too metallic. I came in twice a week, usually early, when it was still quiet. That morning, Ellie Marsh, our co-founder and the legal half of our brains, was already there, tapping away in her docs folder. She glanced up as I entered and gave me a tight smile. "I've got something," she said. "You should see this." She turned her screen toward me. It was a forwarded email chain. The latest message, from a staffer I didn't recognize, included attachments labeled Jensen Curriculum Summary V3 and SAT Tips by Diana PDF. My chest tightened. Ellie scrolled up. "Apparently, one of our newer admin assistants wants to present our materials at the local Educators Rising Forum next Friday," she said, under her name. "She didn't ask," I said, though it came out more like a whisper. "She also doesn't know who wrote them," Ellie said gently. "We've been so careful keeping you anonymous. No founder bio, no public credit. That was your call, remember?" I did remember. It felt easier that way, less vulnerable, fewer questions. "Do we know for sure it's her?" I asked. Ellie clicked an older message. "Diana Jensen, Portland branch. Onboarding date, May 5th. I nodded slowly. It was her. That afternoon, Marcy's daughter stopped by the cafe, where I sometimes worked from the back booth. She'd just finished a virtual practice test. "Whoever made that essay checker? Genius!" she said. "I wish I knew who designed this whole thing." I smiled, but didn't respond. She left with a chai latte and a thank you note I couldn't bring myself to open. I walked back to the library and sat near the window. It was raining again. Portland's favorite mood, I opened a blank document and stared at the cursor, blinking like a metronome. Grandma's voice echoed in my head. Don't let them mistake your stillness for weakness. I clicked into our video portal, set the lighting low, no makeup, no script, just me. The same way I used to record feedback videos for struggling kids. The same way I once filmed a pronunciation guide for a student in New Mexico who stuttered when reading aloud. I pressed record. My name is Kala Jensen, I began. I wrote this curriculum, every outline, every rubric, every test map. I've spent years hiding because it was safer that way. My voice didn't shake. I kept it calm, like I was explaining comma splices again. I showed timestamps, file metadata, photos of my notebooks. And then I ended with a simple line. People like me don't usually get credit, and that's okay. But I won't be erased, not even by accident. I hit upload. Later that night, as I wiped down my side of the motel sink and double-checked the Wi-Fi signal, my phone buzzed. Ellie had texted, "Your mom's scheduled to present next Friday. Want to walk in together?" From the coldness in my behavior and words, to the fact that my mother took the fruits of my work as her own property. Is it time for me to react? If you agree with my thinking, please leave a comment number 9 in the comment section below. Now, let's get to the next development of this story. I didn't come to embarrass her. I came because silence had protected the wrong people long enough. Spring rain tapped steadily against the wide glass windows of our downtown co-working space. The kind of rain Portland wore like a second skin, gentle, gray, familiar. Inside, the lights were warm, and the conference room smelled like blueberry muffins, cinnamon scones, and the faintest whiff of someone's too sweet perfume. Founders Day was written in dry erase marker on the glass wall, underlined twice and framed with a doodled sun. People smiled when I walked in. A few nodded in recognition, not because they knew me, but because they assumed I was someone important. That part, at least, was finally true. Ellie stood at the far end of the room, clipboard in hand, blazer pressed, every inch the composed co-founder, an in-house legal genius. She gave me a quick glance, subtle and steady, just enough to say, "You've got this." "Before we dig into today's plans," she began, "I'd like to introduce someone who's been with us since day 0, though most of you wouldn't know it." Murmurs floated around the room. Forks paused midair. Ellie stepped aside. I walked forward, one breath at a time. Not shaky, not rehearsed. Just ready. "I'm Kala Jensen," I said, voice even. No need to clear my throat. "I'm the person who wrote this platform. Every lesson, every rubric, every support module. I started this 2 years ago in a motel room with a borrowed Chromebook and 57 cents in my checking account." The room was quiet now, not tense, just listening. I didn't share my name before because I wasn't ready. I was tired of being asked to prove myself. But now I want you to know who's behind the work you've trusted with your students. I told them about tutoring from the library, about GED students in Texas and New Mexico, about the thank you notes that reminded me I was doing something that mattered. I didn't cry, I didn't dramatize. I just laid it out like a fact sheet, soft but firm. Then I turned. Diana was seated 3 chairs in, blouse crisp, hands clutched around a ceramic mug from the break room. She looked like she was trying not to be seen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even narrow my eyes. "I built this," I said to her, plain and clear. Her eyes flicked up, and for the first time in my life, I think she really saw me. She blinked rapidly. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" I held her gaze. "Because I knew you'd never ask." Someone near the coffee carafe coughed quietly. A few eyes shifted toward Ellie, but no one interrupted. Diana's fingers tapped her mug once, then stilled. What happens now? I didn't answer right away. I let the silence settle, not to punish, but to let it breathe. I meet her gaze and reply, "We'll speak privately after this meeting." She called me overly sensitive my whole life. Now she looked ready to cry over a stapled contract. The sun filtered gently through the narrow window, casting faint streaks of light across the desk between us. Outside, birds were chirping, a rare sound in Portland's usual drizzle, and for a moment, the warmth felt like it might soften what was coming. I had brewed tea earlier, left it on the corner of the desk untouched. Honey with chamomile, because that's what she used to drink. Whether she noticed or not, I didn't know. Diana sat stiffly across from me, hands folded so tightly in her lap, her knuckles had turned pale. Her makeup was perfect as always, neutral lipstick, barely their eyeliner, but the way her jaw clenched gave her away. The manila folder sat between us. Inside was a severance package, neatly typed, legally sound, emotionally impossible. I took a slow breath. "I want to walk through this with you," I said quietly. "Not because I enjoy it, but because I believe it's what has to be done." She didn't answer, just stared straight ahead, past me, as if fixing her gaze on the bookshelf behind. A year ago, I mailed her a handwritten card for Mother's Day. Pale pink envelope, soft ink, simple words. "I miss us." It came back unopened, returned to sender, folded with a crease that never quite flattened again. I kept it anyway. "You misrepresented intellectual property," I continued. "Curriculum you didn't create. That alone would be grounds for dismissal in any organization." "I didn't know it was yours," she said quickly, then added with bite, "You never claimed it." I nodded. "I didn't. You're right. I stayed quiet because I was used to it. But that doesn't make it yours." She reached for the folder, fingers trembling slightly. "This is your idea of revenge?" I shook my head. "Number this is about drawing a line. I'm offering 3 months severance, continued health coverage through August, and if needed, a professional reference, as long as it's not in education." That stung. I saw it land. Her eyes narrowed, then dropped to the desk. "You're humiliating me in front of people who don't even know you." I didn't flinch. "That's the point. You never bothered to know me either." She winced, not dramatically. Just a flicker in her expression, like something had landed harder than she wanted it to. I stood slowly and walked to the bookshelf, reached for the frame I'd tucked between 2 policy binders. I set it down gently between us. She leaned forward. Her breath caught. "You kept this?" I nodded. "It reminded me of who I hoped you'd be." She picked up the frame, hands softer now, looked at it like it was a photo of someone she barely remembered. "I never even opened it," she whispered. "I know." The silence between us stretched, not angry this time, just heavy with everything we'd never said. She placed the card back in its place and sat up a little straighter, smoothing the front of her blouse. "I suppose I should thank you for the severance." "You don't have to," I said, "but I meant it." She glanced at the envelope again. "What happens now?" "You go forward," I said. "The way we all do. One step, then the next." She didn't look at me as she rose from her chair, but I noticed she didn't rush either. As she walked toward the door, her heels made a gentle click on the floor. Not the sharp staccato she usually preferred. This one sounded more like letting go. She reached the threshold and paused, hand on the doorframe. "What will people think of me now?" she asked, not angry, just tired. I met her gaze and replied, "That's up to you." She didn't nod, didn't say goodbye. But the door closed softly behind her, and for once, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something had finally stopped pretending to be whole. And that, in its own quiet way, was enough. I never wanted to win a war. I just wanted to stop fighting battles no one else saw. The morning light spilled through the blinds, soft and forgiving. Late May in Portland meant the rain was finally giving way to golden haze and birdsong, and for once, it felt like the weather matched the quiet in my chest. I sat in my home office, barefoot, calm, tea steeping beside me, surrounded by the kind of stillness I used to think was loneliness, but now understood as peace. The stack of thank you notes on my desk was modest but steady. Each card was a different shade of hope, some written in shaky cursive, others typed by hands still learning to trust themselves again. I picked one at random. The handwriting was neat but cautious. You made space for me when I didn't know where I belonged. Thank you, Ms. Jensen. It made my throat tighten. A year ago, I wouldn't have believed this life could exist. That I could sit here with nonprofit paperwork filed, GED students graduating, a network of tutors slowly growing. That I could have enough, not more than anyone, just enough to stop proving, to start building. Grandma once whispered to me, "You'll build what no one sees, until it's too solid to tear down." At the time, I thought she meant it as encouragement. Now I realized it was also a warning that the work that matters most is often invisible until it's undeniable. Ellie had filed the last of the paperwork the night before. The Ruth Jensen Memorial Scholarship was now official. We would start small, 3 students a year. Tuition help, test support, a few mentoring hours. But I knew Grandma would have liked that. She never believed in doing things for show, just for good. That morning, I bought a box of heavy cream stationery with understated blue borders and spent the next hour handwriting 3 letters. One to Riley, who had passed her GED after failing the essay portion twice. One to Marcus, who kept tutoring sessions secret from his roommates out of embarrassment. One to Joelle, who never spoke during live sessions, but sent me a thank you video with tears in her eyes. Each note was simple. You were never behind, just waiting to be seen. You are more than what you almost gave up. You made it. You matter. After sealing them with care, I slipped on my shoes and walked to Bean and Birch. Lena, the shy teenage barista, greeted me with her usual quiet nod. I watched her wipe down the counters like she always did, efficient, unseen. A young girl who reminded me too much of myself at that age, tucked in the corners, polite to a fault, and completely overlooked. While she turned to refill the pastry display, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. No name, no return address. Inside, it simply read, "You're not invisible. Your work matters." I tucked it into the tip jar and left before she could turn around. Back home, Marcy was waiting on my porch. She handed me a Tupperware of cinnamon rolls, grinning. "Extra cinnamon," she said, "for the extra miles you've walked with people." She followed me inside, where we sat and shared coffee without needing to fill the space with words. She told me her daughter had smiled again, really smiled, after seeing her GED results. It wasn't just relief, she said. It was pride, like she'd finally seen herself the way we always hoped she would. Before she left, she squeezed my hand and said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Quiet changes the world, too." That night, I sat at my desk, the office lit by a small amber lamp and the last of the spring sun. The motel receipt still hung on the wall above me, yellowed and curling slightly at the edges. Next to it, the pink envelope from the Mother's Day card I'd sent long ago. She never opened it, but I'd stopped waiting for her to. I looked at them both, proof of where I came from and what I'd carried through. I whispered aloud, just to myself, "I'm not bitter. I'm finally free." Then I reached into my drawer, pulled out one last note, blank for now, and wrote slowly in pen, the same sentence that had started showing up in my dreams. "Someone out there sees you. You're not lost." I folded it carefully, slid it into an envelope, and placed it beside my keys. Tomorrow, I'd find another tip jar, and maybe someone else would find it, just in time. Some victories don't come with applause. They come with the quiet weight of knowing you finally stood your ground. I never set out to prove anyone wrong. I just wanted to be seen without having to raise my voice. Kindness, I've learned, doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs to last long enough to outlive the silence. When we stop judging people by their setbacks and start noticing the quiet strength they carry, we make room for healing to begin. So if this story found you in a quiet moment, maybe pass that stillness forward. Sometimes, the gentlest truths are the ones we carry longest.